So go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and we will be picking up in verse 15. Surprise, surprise, I did not get through all of chapter 7 last week. Got long-winded on a couple of texts. A couple of texts that I think had some good application for us nonetheless. So we're going to start and in verse 15. And again, we see Solomon reaching forward to today, even though he's an Old Testament, wrote in Old Testament times, that this is an indication of there's nothing new under the sun. This happened in Solomon's day, and there is times when this happens as well. And verse 15, Solomon says, I have seen everything in my days of vanity. Okay? And now he's going to expound for the next little while on things that he's seen, highlights. He's seen it all. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. So, this is a vanity, and this is a great evil under the sun. Let me start by saying that this is the exception that proves the rule. Generally speaking, when you look in the Proverbs, you look in the Psalms, and you consider the righteous and the wicked, the general pattern is that the opposite is true. The name of the wicked is cut off. They will be no more. There is no inheritance. Their name does not endure. That's not just true in heavenly times. We've pointed out on numerous occasions that if you look at the spies that went to spy out the land, that to spy out the land in Numbers chapter 12, there's 12 that went in there. 10 of them were wicked and gave a bad report. No, we can't take the land. We can't take the land. The enemy is too big. We were like grasshoppers of their sight. Anybody remember the name of any of those 10? I'll tell you who you do remember. You remember Caleb and you remember Joshua, because they were faithful to the Lord and they did what was right. Just to spite William one time, I memorized the names of about 3 or 4 of them, and I can tell you that I've forgotten them since. The names don't stick. You have to make a point of remembering them. Why? Because they didn't do anything noteworthy other than to rebel against God's will and to be destroyed. If we turn forward into chapter 8, verse 12 and 13, we're going to see the pattern that is established in general. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. Yes, there are some times when maybe a person can profit from wickedness in this world, but generally speaking, the wicked are cut off and the righteous remain both in this world and in the next. Think of those who live a life that is totally opposed to God's will. And they get involved with all sorts of crime and with drugs and other sorts of things. You look at the average life expectancies of such people, and it doesn't surprise us to see that a lot of them never make it into their 30s. Those that lead a completely wicked lifestyle, generally, it catches up to them, and it catches up to them fast. But nonetheless, there is every once in a while someone that comes along who, despite his wickedness, seems to profit from it, and the righteous seems to perish. He isn't here. When Solomon wrote this book, he wasn't in power, but Ahab comes to mind. Ahab and him taking Naboth's vineyard. Ahab was a wicked man, and he stayed in power for quite the time. We can be discouraged by this. We're going to have more to say about this in chapter 8, so we'll stop there and continue in the text. But hold that thought about the application for us and the need to not get overly discouraged by this pattern or by this exception. Verse 16 to 18. Do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp this and also not remove your hand from the other, for he who fears God will escape them all. So, let's again start with what Solomon is not saying. There is an expression, a general truism that was given by Aristotle. I'm sure others hit upon it. That in a lot of things is good to live by. Everything in moderation. Oh, we say, you don't want to eat too little or you'll be weak. You don't want to eat too much or you'll have this problem that I have. If you eat in moderation and exercise in moderation, you'll have good physical health and you'll be your ideal body weight. Solomon is not saying, oh, don't be overly wicked. So I'll be a little bit wicked. And I don't want to be too good. I want to be just in the middle. So he's not saying, wickedness is no big deal. If it's in your life, don't worry about it. Just don't go too far. Don't become an alcoholic. But, Saturday and Fridays were meant to have a little bit too much to drink. This is not what Solomon is saying here at all. So let's look at I think in order to understand this, let's look at what he is saying at the very end. He who fears God will escape them all. Can one be overly righteous? Can one be overly wise? How could one be overly righteous and overly wise? Well, certainly we see that. Let me rephrase that. Can one be overly righteous and overly wise in the sense of it leading to destruction for themselves? I believe they can be if we're being proscriptive about it. If we go and we look at he who fears God will escape them all, when we live a life that is guided by principle, that is, when we are motivated in our service to God to fear God, to love our neighbor, and to be motivated by hope, faith, and love, we will end up doing what is right, and we will end up avoiding what is wrong. I think it's obvious. We don't have to belabor the point. Don't be overly wicked, nor be foolish. You'll die before your time. That point, I think, is rather obvious. If we look in Colossians 2, I keep going past it here. This Bible, yeah. We look in Colossians chapter 2. And verse 21 to 23, 20 to 23. Therefore, if you died with Christ from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom and self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. The Pharisees as well had a form of self-righteousness and hypocritical religion. They considered themselves righteous, but had rules and regulations that went so far above and beyond what God had required that it was actually, and Jesus describes it in Matthew 23, a great burden. Now, they weren't living according to that burden, but the poor folks that were trying to live according to that burden, he says, that they put great burdens on the shoulders of men, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger. They were being, I believe, more righteous or trying to, and it was a self-righteousness than what the scriptures required. Is it possible to do good? I know some people have used this text to say, have said, well, don't be overly righteous, you'll end up like Jesus. And I don't think that's what Solomon is saying here. Jesus obeyed God's will perfectly. Jesus was righteous in what he was supposed to be righteous in, which was to fulfill the law. If anything, I think Jesus showed the balance. The problem wasn't on Jesus's side. The problem was on the Pharisees' side and the wicked men and women of his generation. Could we do good, but do good to the point where it's harming us and doing no good? Well, I think yes, we could. Now, I could, for example, put in my entire paycheck into the collection today. Would that be a good action in and of itself? Yes, it would. But the problem is that it would also bring harm to myself, because now I would not have money to pay my bills. We can be good and still bring harm to ourselves if we are overly good. So I think that this is more what Solomon is getting at. And if you have your own thoughts on this verse, I'm happy to discuss it after the class. Partly about what Solomon is getting at here. Verse 19 and 20 are sort of self-explanatory. We'll read them and we'll go past them pretty quickly. Wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city. We've already discussed the benefits of wisdom, so we'll just leave it at that. But there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Solomon, this is very similar to Paul's statement, for all have fallen short of the glory of God. But you notice, and this is worth pointing out, that the sin does not stop the person from being just or good. We might be belaboring this point a little bit, but the distinguishing characteristic between the fool and the wise is not that the wise never makes a mistake and not that the good never make a mistake. It is that when the good man makes a mistake, when the good man sins, he recognizes it, he repents, he gets up, he asks for forgiveness, and he tries to do better. The wicked either fail to recognize that it's a sin, they just don't acknowledge what I just did, it's a sin, or they say it's not a big deal, they make excuses, and it's their habitual practice. It is a statement that is above, it's linked with the statement that the text that we just looked at. Verse 21 and 22. Also do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant curse you. For many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others. The most common sin of all is the sin of the tongue. To the point where James says that if you have the tongue under control, you're pretty much a perfect person or complete in your behavior. Why is that? Because James knows how hard it is to exhibit self-control in the tongue. If you're exhibiting self-control in that area, you likely have the self-control and discipline in every other area of your life. That's how difficult it is. Jesus says, forgive others, that we have to forgive others if we expect to be forgiven ourselves. Again, Solomon is not saying that what's going on here, he's not justifying it. He's not saying gossip, rumor, and slander is okay. Don't worry about it. You've done it too. No big deal. What he is saying is, if you really think, if you really look, if you've been a supervisor or manager, you've been in charge of anything, can you honestly say that when you were on the other end, that you never had anything to say about the person in charge? Be willing to forgive others, because oftentimes we are or have been guilty of the same thing. And other things too is, do not take to heart. everything people say. That is really, really good advice in life in general. To develop a bit of a thick skin and to not wear our hearts on our sleeves, as the expression goes, and not to internalize everything to the point where we're mulling over it. I've seen, and I have done it myself, been entirely paralyzed for a day going, well, what did so-and-so mean when they said that? Oh, I bet you they meant this. No, they didn't mean that. No, I don't think they meant that. No, the tone of their voice, They definitely did. Why would they bring that up? Why would they mention that? And realize, oh, there goes 4 or 5 hours spent as a dog worries on something, just chewing it over. Let it go. Just let it go. Or if it really that much, talk to them and say, did you mean this? I heard it this way. Did you mean that? Or whatever. If we internalize absolutely everything, we're not going to get much done. And at some point in time, we do have to let it go and move on. And this is largely what Solomon is saying. I actually had the opportunity to put this in practice just the other day. It's amazing what people say when they don't think that you're in earshot. And I'm glad I had read this passage and it was in my mind recently as I was preparing it, because it was one of my employees, and it wasn't particularly, as far as things are concerned, it wasn't that bad really, but it did kind of like, let it go. Let it go and move on. The next few verses are a bit of a challenge. But I think that if we look at a few of the things that Solomon is saying, we can get at what he is saying. Verses 23 to 29. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to search and seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and of madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Here is what I have found, says the preacher, adding one thing to the other to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Truly, this only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. What is Solomon talking about here? He has a lot that he's saying. Let's go verse by verse again and see some things, pull out a few things that he's saying. Zoom in on verse 23. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. Wisdom is hard to get. It is elusive. You have to work for it. We talked about this last week when we looked at chapter 7 and verse 12. Wisdom is good with an inheritance and profit to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Just like one works for riches, one has to work for wisdom. But a big difference between riches and wisdom, as we pointed out, nobody just gets wisdom for sheer luck, right? And you can invest in a stock. William and I could both invest in a stock, and I could do a whole bunch of research, and he could do a whole bunch of research. Something happens to sink my company, his company happens to go through the roof, and it's just a coincidence that that happens. That could be luck, okay? The proverbial rich uncle that we all hear about, leaving somebody in our will, and you say, hey, Jeremy, oh, there you go, $3 million, here you go. Woo-hoo. That doesn't happen with wisdom. One does not just wake up in the morning and have wisdom just handed to them. One has to work at it. And the frustrating part about wisdom is that the more that you actually gain, the more you actually realize that you have to learn. The wisest people in the world don't go around saying, oh, I'm so wise. The scriptures warn about that, for one. But they realize, and just like there's a lot of things that are comparable to this. Paul talked about buffeting his body daily, knowing that he had things to work on. Paul was saying his journey was not complete, that he was not perfect. Now, I know we can look at that and go, okay, Paul, what, you returned a library book late once? You know, we might mock and say, oh, Paul doesn't have much to work on. But Paul is really aware of the fact that he still has room in his journey to grow. And he still has to be disciplined. And he still has to go through that same process that we have to go through. Paul never says except at the very, very end, possibly weeks before his death, he never says, I've arrived, perfect, I got nothing to work on, everyone else can really benefit from. Look at Paul. We don't see Paul taking that attitude. A wise person realizes how much they still have to learn and how much they still have to go. It is a process. Verse 24 and 27. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? How do you go about gaining this? Verse 27. Here is what I have found, adding one thing to the other to find out the reason. There is deduction. That the wise are rare. Verse 28, 1 in 1,000. And its conclusions can sometimes be uncertain. But there are some conclusions that are definitive. We see two in verse 29 and in verse 26. Truly, this only I have found out. Now, Solomon likes to exaggerate. We've got a whole book full of what he found out. But this is one of these things that are fundamental. God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. I really do wish that there is more individuals that would pay attention to what that verse is saying and the application of that verse, because we would avoid so much of the confusion that we have in the religious world right now. Most of the religious world says man is born into sin and is fundamentally, irrevocably depraved. And that's the reason why man seeks out many schemes. It's not what Solomon is saying here. Solomon is saying God made man and woman upright. But they have altogether gone aside. They have altogether become unprofitable. We have sought out many schemes. Wisdom and foolishness is a decision that we have made and we continue to make. So let's make sure that we're making the right decision. God is not to blame for man's wickedness. Man is to blame for man's wickedness. We're the ones that weren't content with what God had to offer. We were the ones that, given the possibility of having absolutely everything in the garden, insisted on having the one thing that we were told we couldn't, and suffered the consequences of that. That's on us, not on God. The second general conclusion that he has come to is that wickedness ensnares a person, and it becomes progressively harder and harder to get out of. Just think about the trap that David ensnared himself with. Okay, we talk about the sin boulder. He made a mistake. His first mistake was looking at Bathsheba and lusting after her. And then he took her. And then he had relations with her. And then she got pregnant. And then he realized, since her husband's at war, they're going to do the math and figure out this isn't my son. So, maybe, given the timing, I could pull Uriah back from the front lines And they might be like, do the numbers, but it's relatively close. Okay. Certainly it couldn't be that this is the king's son, so, it's just the numbers are a little bit off. But Uriah won't go to his wife. Well, his other companions can't. David hatches a scheme to kill him, which incidentally may have killed others as well. It just goes on and on and on. His life is increasingly becoming ensnared and dedicated. He feels that his actions are dictated by the actions that he's already done. Shakespeare does a masterful job in Macbeth of having that same thing, to the point where Macbeth at one point halfway through the play makes the statement that I am too far gone, I am too far steeped in blood. I have no choice now. He doesn't want to murder certain individuals to cover up his crime of having killed Duncan. But what's his choice? If they have knowledge and they come forward, he's revealed and the whole scheme is unraveled. The wickedness has ensnared him so much that his next move is already decided, unless he completely turns around, and that would result in his own death. He's dedicated to it. It's ensnared him completely. He who pleases God shall escape from her. He has a specific application in mind here, but it doesn't have to be restricted to this scenario. The sinner shall be trapped by her, but he who pleases God will escape that fate. There's a whole bunch of things that Solomon cannot figure out, but there's some things that he can figure out. Man's wickedness is on man. God is just in all of his dealings. The wicked will be ensnared by their own wickedness, and the righteous shall escape from those very same snares through their faith and service to God. I don't know about you, but have you ever stopped to consider all of the decisions in your life that maybe you've made that you decided, I would really like to do this, but I know God's will says otherwise. Have you ever stopped to consider that if you had made the wrong decision, what your life might be like now? I know it's somewhat an exercise in speculation, but I encourage you to do that. Maybe you have friends or relatives that took that other path, and you can see the shambles that some of their lives may be in, and that should give you a rough indication. Before we go on, let's look at verse 8:1, because I actually think it's a good conclusion to what Solomon has just said. Who is like a wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the sternness of his face is changed. Wisdom has a way of changing a person. I don't know if have you ever looked at somebody and you've thought, you know almost what their disposition is just by looking at them? I don't mean their mood at the time, and everyone can go through ups and downs throughout the day, but you can tell just by looking at them. That is a person who is, generally speaking, calm and has a peaceful heart. Or you looked at someone and you can see there is a person who has joy, or who has zeal, or there is a loving person, and you can generally tell by their disposition. Or on the other side, you can pass people and you can go, wow, that person is just depressed and really sad. That person is miserable. My friend Joanna and I went for a walk a couple of weeks ago. We passed a person. He had his hands in his pocket, doing this whole thing. And I don't know how to quite describe it, but as we said hi to him, and he was like, yeah, hi. We kept going. I waited for about 10 steps, and I leaned over to her and I said, he was probably only like 19, 20. I was like, wow, that guy has the whole teenage male brooding thing down to a fine art. He just had that disposition. Wisdom brings joy. Wisdom brings a change, not just to our heart, but a change that is noticeable to others as well. Do we communicate with our body language, joy and zeal and peace. These are the sorts of things that should make a person stop and go, something about that person. That person seems to generally be happy with life. And I don't necessarily mean happy because of circumstances. I mean joy. There's another extreme that we can go to that, and we can fake our emotions. And we can fake our emotions, and it can be insincere. But I think that when we have the knowledge of heaven and we have the knowledge of Christ, we are sincerely going to be expressing joy most of the time. And if we're not, maybe we should do an assessment of what it is that we're spending our time thinking of and the reason why we're not. Chapter 8, verse 2 through 6. This one I think we can go through relatively quick. Keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. Where the word of a king is, there is power. He who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. Because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of man increases greatly. For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? No one has power over the spirit to retain the spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There's no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. All this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There's a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. Verse 2 through 6 parallel well with Romans 13. I think we're familiar with that text where Paul says that we should be subject to the governing authorities, and that what governing authorities that there are there because of God's will, that in general the structure is put up. We are wise to obey the king, and the king's authority is legitimate. Paul's more generic in his statement, largely because, and so that encompasses now our own system of government, democracy. Not too many systems of government in Solomon's day other than the monarchy or the king. As far as the scope of it is concerned, sometimes they only ruled over nothing, maybe as large as just a city versus an entire country, but kings were the norm then. Every matter will be brought into judgment. And Solomon has advice here that's similar to those that are in authority, similar to what Paul has. But for all the king's authority, verses 7 through 9, he cannot overrule death. Remember, we had looked at previously that do not marvel at a wickedness when it occurs within a country, because one official reports to a higher official and they all eventually report to the king. Even the king, he cannot overrule the edict that has come from God that man is mortal and that there is a day in which man will die. He has no power to change that. He has no power to abrogate that. And there is a judgment that even the king comes to. And none of us know the time from that judgment, and none of us can avoid it. Some of us, through healthy living in general, access to good medicine might prolong it, but that day is coming for each and every one of us. Verse 9 would be easy to overlook. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. There's a few times when Solomon's been writing where he never specifically mentions Saul and David, and yet I often wonder whether or not he had them in mind. When we look at chapter 4, verse 13 to 16, about the poor and wise youth and the old and foolish king who will be admonished no more, I often think that maybe when Solomon was writing that, he was thinking of Saul and David. Could he have been thinking about Saul and David when he wrote this statement? I believe it's entirely possible. But it fits into the thing about, remember we had looked at a couple of weeks ago about riches, and everybody wants to be rich. Solomon was rich, and he gives us a list of things that are problems with wealth. Well, everyone wants to be the one in charge, but it's not always all that it's cracked up to be. It has its own set of problems. There's not a whole bunch in this section that has a whole bunch of New Testament application for ourselves. So we're going to go on to verse 10 through 17, because this does have an application for us in here. Verse 10, 12, and 15. Oh yes, verse 11. Why are we skipping that? There's a reason. We will be looking at the rest of this text. Oh, did I forget to? Oh, I forgot to write the notes out for the rest of the chapter. Well, good thing I remember them. Then I saw the wicked buried who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had done so. This also is vanity. We've already read verse 12 and 13, so we'll go to 14 and 15. There is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens, according to the work of the wicked. Again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said this also is vanity. So I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry. For this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. Actually, verses 16 and 17, I had wanted to link. That's right, I did put it in here. We'll read it, but it was intended to go with the end of chapter 7, verse 23 to 29. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it. That difficulty of finding wisdom, that was meant to, those two verses were actually meant to be read when we were looking at the end of chapter 7. Let's go back. You see it, that Solomon acknowledges that there can be an exception where the wicked profit, but in general, we have that they are forgotten. Their name is forgotten, and they are out of the way. We'll look at verse 11 before we make the application of verse 10, 12, and 15. Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the hearts of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. There is an expression that is used that does not appear in the Bible, but it is a general truism in the legal system. Justice delayed is justice denied. That is an expression in our legal system. Sometimes it can be talking about the need for a speedy trial, which is actually a constitutional right recognized in our charter in the States, and in most modern democracies, the right to a speedy trial is a fundamental human right and is considered it. There is on the flip side, though, where a sentence against evil work is not executed speedily, that people see that it appears as if people are able to get away with wickedness and continue it. Solomon is saying right here that one of the reasons why the wicked appear to prosper is not because of God and the way that God has set it up. It's because God has set up a government, one of whom's responsibility is, as Paul says, he does not hold the sword in vain, is to punish evil and to award and recognize good. And when the government fails in its capacity to do that duty, it encourages wickedness. We have a system of government that mocks God's intentions by not allowing the death penalty for certain crimes, such as murder, first-degree murder. The Supreme Court itself recently recognized. I was angry at its decision at first. I even posted on it in Facebook, the Jordan decision. You may have heard about this one. The Supreme Court ruled that the government had taken too long to bring something to trial. And I believe it was a murder charge. And because they had taken so long to bring that charge forward, the charge against that person was stayed. When I saw this at first, I was infuriated. I thought, you just let a potential murderer go. I thought this was a bad decision on the Supreme Court's hand. This is not a political discussion, nor is it meant to be a political discussion. What the decision was meant to do was to put timelines for the government in place to say, you need to try these types of trials, and no, 4 or 5 years, not happening. It needs to be done within this X period of time. It needs to be dealt with in a timely manner. And if it goes over that, because witnesses might not be available because of all sorts of other things that they reasoned, justice may not be done. Justice may not be done for the accused. Justice may not be done for those that are bringing forth the accusation or the victim. But this was a direct result of the sentence against an evil work, or the accusation of an evil work being delayed and not done speedily. People today, ourselves, and in Solomon's day, can get discouraged very easily when we think that evil prospers and good doesn't really pay. And we might say to ourselves, but in heaven it will all work out. There's a prophet that asked God questions. Why hasn't Babylon been punished yet? Or is it Nineveh? We saw in William's study recently that they had taken that to an extreme as an excuse to engage in evil, that God doesn't really care about the wicked. In fact, he seems to reward it. Turn to Psalm 37. We'll finish off with this one. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the works of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass, wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall be no more. Indeed, you will look carefully for his place, but it shall be no more. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. Did you catch the phrase that David kept using over and over again? Do not fret. Yes, there are times in which the evil may prosper in the short term, and sometimes, though I think it is again the exception, in the long term, it would appear that. But if we trust in the Lord, and we focus on what God has given us. What Solomon concludes here in chapter 8, verse 15, so I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labor. Trust God in those situations where the wicked seem to prosper, that he will do what he says, and that they will not prosper, that it may appear like they're going to prosper, but they will be cut down like the grass in this life and in the next. And that we should allow that to be in God's domain and trust that to the Lord and enjoy our life and what God has given us. And to, as Paul says whatever things are noble, whatever things are true, whatever things are of good report, etc., etc., Philippians 4:8, to reflect on those. We can drive ourselves batty and into a state of misery and anxiety if we focus only with what is wrong in the world. There are times when I have to choose to turn the news off and choose to tune the newspaper, not look at the newspaper. I like knowing in general what goes on in the world. But I can recognize it now, whereas I couldn't in my 20s and in my teens, even in my early 30s. There is a point where all of that negativity that the news conveys starts weighing on you. And you have to make a decision at that point to say, enough. I'm going to focus on what is good. What is good is here. And what is good, and there is good in the world. It's sometimes hard to see, but there is beauty in the world and there is good in the world, and we need to focus on that, and we need to trust God and the system that He has set up both on earth and in heaven for our own sense of sanity and our own enjoyment of life. For next